The wind was a blade, honed on endless plains of ice and snow. It screamed around the broken cabin, a sound that was both a lament and a threat. Inside, Hannah huddled deeper into the thin, threadbare blanket, the sound of the wind, a constant reminder of the world outside and the world that was gone. Her family was a phantom limb, an ache that was dull one moment, sharp and unbearable the next. Her husband, Thomas, strong and hopeful, had believed they could make a life here, carving a place from the unforgiving land. Her daughter, Sarah, all bright eyes and quick laughter, had loved the way the snow sparkled like captured stars. Now, only the sparkle was left, cold and distant, outside the cracked windowpane. Grief sat with her, heavy and silent, a second body in the small, freezing space. It had arrived the day the sickness took first. Thomas, then Sarah, swift and brutal as a wolf pack on a lone deer. Hannah had buried them herself, the ground a frozen, unyielding enemy. The effort had stolen the last of her strength, leaving her weak and shivering, the meager fire in the hearth long dead. Food was gone. Hope was a distant, forgotten son. She was simply waiting now, waiting for the cold or the hunger or the sheer, overwhelming sorrow to finish what the sickness had started. The cabin, their dream, was a tomb of splintered wood and frozen memories. Days bled into one another, marked only by the slow descent into deeper cold and a more profound emptiness. Her body was a shell, mind adrift in a haze of fever and memory. She saw Thomas's smile, heard Sarah's giggle, felt the phantom warmth of their hands. These visions were sustenance and torture, a cruel reminder of what the icy wasteland had stolen. The prejudice they had faced when they arrived, the suspicion from the nearest small settlement towards outsiders, seemed trivial now, a forgotten sting compared to the gaping wound of loss. She was an outsider everywhere, now, even in her own skin. She did not know how long she had been alone. Time had lost its meaning, dissolving into a single, protracted moment of suffering. The storm had buried the cabin even deeper, drifts piling against the walls, sealing her in. It felt final, like the earth pulling a shroud over her small, insignificant life. She closed her eyes, the image of Sarah's face shimmering behind her eyelids. She wanted to follow. Then, a sound, not the wind, a crunch, muffled but distinct from outside. Hannah's eyes fluttered open. It must be the wind, she thought, playing tricks. The snow was too deep, the cold too absolute for anyone to be out there, especially not anyone who would care to find her. She was forgotten, a ghost in the making. The sound came again, closer this time, a rhythmic thud, like something heavy striking packed snow, then wood. Her heart, sluggish and weak, gave a tiny, startled lurch. Fear, a forgotten sensation, pricked at her. Was it an animal? A bear, woken early? Or worse, men from the settlement, come to claim the cabin, or simply to ensure the troublesome outsiders were truly gone. They hadn't been welcoming, their faces hard and unwelcoming, their words few and sharp. The thudding continued, insistent, closer to the door. Then a voice, deep, resonant, speaking words she did not understand, but the tone was not hostile. It was cautious, perhaps curious. It was followed by the sound of snow being shoveled or pushed away from the door. Her breath hitched. Someone was out there. The door groaned, straining against the snow piled high. Light, weak and diffused by the white landscape, filtered into the gloom. A figure stood silhouetted against the brightness, large and broad-shouldered. He stepped inside, bringing with him the sharp bite of the outside air, but also, surprisingly, a faint smell of wood smoke and something wild and clean. He was a native man, dressed in furs and hides that seemed to belong to the land itself. His face, framed by dark hair and weathered by the elements, was unreadable. His eyes, dark and intelligent, swept across the cabin, resting on her huddled form. Hannah could only stare, too weak to move, too bewildered to speak. This was not someone from the settlement. They had made it clear they wanted nothing to do with the local tribes, their fear and suspicion a palpable thing. Yet, here one stood, in the wreckage of her life. The man said something in his language, his voice low and steady. Hannah shook her head slightly. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice raspy and unused. He paused, his gaze sharp, assessing her clearly fragile state. He looked around the cabin again, seeing the empty hearth, the barren shelves, the single, still form beneath the blanket. Understanding seemed to dawn in his eyes, not sudden but slow and heavy, like the melting of a deep snowdrift. He knelt, slowly, carefully, a large man moving with unexpected grace. He reached out a hand, not to touch her, but towards the cold hearth. He gestured to the empty space, then made a motion of striking flint. "Fire," Hannah croaked, the word a question and a desperate plea. He nodded, a single firm dip of his head. He stood again and moved with quiet efficiency. He went back outside briefly, returning with an armful of dry kindling and larger logs. He worked quickly, kneeling by the hearth, his movements practiced and sure. Soon, a small flame licked at the kindling, hesitant at first, then growing bolder, chasing the shadows from the corner of the room. The warmth, though slight, felt like a miracle. He did not speak again for a long time, focusing on building the fire, ensuring it caught properly. Hannah watched him, wary but mesmerized. His presence filled the small space, not with aggression, but with a quiet strength that was both intimidating and strangely comforting. He was entirely unlike the men she had known, or the ones from the settlement with their nervous energy and quick judgments. This man was grounded, solid as the ancient mountains she could sometimes see in the distance. When the fire was burning steadily, casting dancing light on the walls, he turned back to her. He had something in his hand, a small pouch. He opened it, revealing dried meat and what looked like berries. He knelt again, holding a piece of the meat out to her. "Eat," he said, the word clear and simple, his voice still low. It was the first English word he had spoken. Hannah hesitated. Every instinct screamed caution. He was a stranger, from a people she had been told to fear. But the smell of the food was overpowering, a siren song to her starved body. And his eyes, though serious, held no malice, only a quiet, watchful patience. She reached out a trembling hand and took the meat. It was tough but flavorful, and she chewed it slowly, tears pricking her eyes at the sheer unexpected goodness of it. It had been so long. He gave her a little water from a skin he carried, holding it for her as she drank. He watched her with that same steady, unreadable gaze. She felt a deep flush of shame at her weakness, her disheveled state, but he gave no sign of judgment. He simply observed. He stayed through the night, sitting by the fire, a silent, watchful guardian. Hannah drifted in and out of sleep, the unfamiliar warmth and the presence of another human being, even this quiet stranger, a strange balm to her ravaged soul. The wind still howled, but it felt less menacing now, held at bay by the man and the fire. In the morning, he was still there. The fire had been replenished. He rose as she stirred, moving towards the door. He paused, looking back at her. "I am Takoda," he said, his voice calm. He gestured outside. "Snow deep, stay." Hannah managed a weak nod. "Hannah," she replied. "Thank you." He nodded once more and went outside. She heard him working again, clearing more snow. He returned later with more wood and, to her astonishment, a freshly killed rabbit. He cleaned it expertly outside and brought it in, preparing to cook it over the fire. The smell of the cooking meat filled the cabin, a promise of life returning. Over the next few days, Takoda became a silent, steady presence. He did not speak much, but his actions were clear. He brought food, rabbit, ptarmigan, roots he dug from beneath the snow. He kept the fire burning. He repaired the broken window pane with a piece of hide, stopping the worst of the drafts. He moved around the small cabin with quiet respect for her space, never intrusive, simply present. Hannah began to recover, slowly. The food gave her strength. The warmth chased away the deep chill in her bones. As her body healed, her mind began to clear, but the grief remained, a constant, dull ache beneath the surface. Sometimes she would weep silently, the tears freezing on her cheeks before she could wipe them away. Takoda would not comment, would not offer platitudes. He would simply ensure the fire was warm, or quietly place a mug of hot water near her. His silence was not indifference, it was a deep, respectful understanding of pain that could not be spoken away. She learned to read his quiet cues. A slight shift in his posture meant he was about to go outside. A particular look at the fire indicated he needed more wood. They communicated mostly through gestures, simple words, and shared tasks. She helped him skin the rabbit, her hands clumsy at first, then gaining back some of their old familiarity with work. They cleared snow together, him taking the heavy shovel work, her sweeping near the door. One evening, as the fire crackled, Hannah found her voice. "My husband, my daughter," she began, the words catching in her throat. "The sickness, it took them, they're buried, just outside." She gestured vaguely towards the snow-covered ground. Takoda looked at her, his dark eyes fathomless. He did not say he was sorry, he did not offer empty condolences. Instead, he looked towards the door, then back at her. "They walk with the ancestors," he said simply, his voice gentle. "Their spirits are free of the cold." His words were not what she expected, but they resonated deeper than any conventional sympathy could have. He spoke of spirits, of ancestors, of a world beyond the physical. It was a perspective steeped in the land, in something ancient and enduring. It acknowledged her loss without diminishing it, placing it within a larger, more natural order. Tears spilled down her face, but they were not entirely tears of sorrow this time. They were also tears of release, of being seen and understood in a way she hadn't been, not truly, since her family was gone. As the weeks passed, the snow began its slow, reluctant retreat. Patches of brown earth appeared, muddy and clinging. The sun, higher in the sky now, offered real warmth. Hannah grew stronger, able to move around the cabin easily, to manage the fire herself, to walk outside without collapsing. Takoda still came, less frequently now, bringing fresh game or checking on her wood supply. He was teaching her, without explicit lessons, how to see the land differently, how to find what it offered, even in its harshness. He showed her tracks in the mud, pointed out edible plants beginning to sprout, taught her how to set snares. Their silence became comfortable, companionable. She learned he lived some distance away, deeper in the wilderness, part of a band that moved with the seasons. He did not speak of his own life in detail, but she gleaned fragments, a deep respect for the land, a quiet weariness with the encroaching world of the settlers, a fierce protectiveness of his people and their ways. She sensed he carried his own burdens, his own losses, buried deep beneath that stoic exterior. His eyes held a sadness that mirrored her own, a shared understanding of the price the world exacted. The prejudice of the settlement weighed on her mind. What would they think if they knew she had been living, even intermittently, with a native man? She had heard their talk, their fearful whispers, their dismissive labels. They saw the tribes as savage, as a threat, as less than human. It was a stark contrast to the quiet kindness and competence Takoda had shown her, a kindness that had literally saved her life. One afternoon, a group from the settlement arrived. They had waited until the snow had melted sufficiently to travel easily. They came ostensibly to check on her, but their real purpose was clear in their prying eyes and the way they glanced around the small cabin. They were curious, suspicious, perhaps hoping to find reason to dislike her more, or to claim the land Thomas had cleared. There were three of them: Mr. Davies, the self-appointed leader of the small community, a man with a perpetually pinched expression; Mr. Gable, younger, shifty-eyed; and a woman, Martha, whose mouth was set in a thin, disapproving line. "Hannah," Davies called out, his voice booming, trying to sound concerned. He stepped into the cabin, Gable and Martha hovering behind him. "Heard the sickness took your family, terribly sorry, just came to see you were all right." Hannah stood straighter, her hand going instinctively to her side, where she kept a small knife Takoda had sharpened for her. She was no longer the helpless woman shivering under a blanket. Her time in the cold, the quiet strength she had found, the connection she had formed, it had changed her. "I am fine, thank you, Mr. Davies," she said, her voice steady. Martha's eyes narrowed, taking in the tidier cabin, the remnants of a recent meal. "You seem recovered," she said, the word laced with suspicion, as if recovery itself were suspect. "The spring is coming," Hannah replied simply, "and I learned to make do." Gable's eyes darted around the room, lingering on the hide patching the window, the unfamiliar tools near the hearth. "Got help, did you?" he asked, his tone implying something unsavory. Hannah felt a surge of defiance. They expected her to be broken, desperate, maybe even dead. She was none of those things. "I had help," she said, meeting his gaze squarely. "Who?" Davies pressed, his voice hardening. "Nobody from the settlement came out this far. It ain't safe, not with—" "Well, not with them about." He gestured vaguely towards the wilderness. The implication hung heavy in the air. Them, the native people, their fear and prejudice were naked on their faces. Hannah felt a hot anger rise within her, burning away the last vestiges of her fear of their judgment. They offered no help when her family was dying, when she was starving and freezing. It was them, the people they demonized, who had shown her kindness, saved her life. "The wilderness provides, Mr. Davies," Hannah said, choosing her words carefully, giving nothing away, yet saying everything. "And sometimes unexpected kindness arrives when you need it most." Martha scoffed. "Kindness? Out here? From who?" "From someone who understands this land," Hannah said, her voice quiet but firm. She would not name Takoda, would not expose him to their narrow-minded cruelty. But she would not deny his help either. She would not let their prejudice taint the only good thing that had happened to her in months. Davies looked at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Frustration? Uncertainty? He couldn't force the information from her, and her quiet strength was clearly unsettling. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "glad to see you're managing. We'll be heading back now. You let us know if you need anything." The offer felt hollow, a formality. "Thank you," Hannah said again, polite but distant. They left, their departure a relief. Hannah watched them go, their figures receding across the still muddy ground. She felt a new resolve solidify within her. She would not go back to the settlement. Their world was not hers, not anymore. Her world was here, in this rebuilt cabin, on this land that was slowly yielding to the spring sun, a world she shared, in a quiet, unspoken way, with the man who had saved her. Weeks turned into months. Spring bloomed, riotous and beautiful, a stark contrast to the brutal winter. Hannah learned to tend a small garden, using seeds Thomas had optimistically brought. She learned to fish in the nearby stream, Takoda showing her the best spots and teaching her how to make a simple weir. She became more self-sufficient, more attuned to the rhythms of the land. Takoda visited less frequently, but their connection deepened in his absence. She thought of him often, remembering his quiet strength, his steady gaze, the unexpected gentleness of his hands when he helped her. She realized she wasn't just grateful, she was beginning to feel something else, something warmer, more complicated. One day, he arrived not with game, but with a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a beautiful, hand-carved wooden bird. It was simple, elegant, its shape suggesting flight. He held it out to her. "For you," he said. His voice was soft, a rare sound. Hannah took it, her fingers tracing the smooth wood. It was a gift of immense value, given the scarcity of everything out here, given the time and skill it represented. More than that, it was a symbol, a tangible representation of his care, of the bond they had forged in the crucible of winter. "It's beautiful, Takoda," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." He did not smile, but his eyes softened around the edges. "Birdflies," he said, gesturing with his hand, a sweeping motion towards the sky. "Spirits fly, you are strong now, like the bird." It was the most he had ever said at once, the most overtly he had acknowledged her journey from near death to resilience. He saw her not just as the woman he had found, broken in the snow, but as someone who had found her strength again, someone who could fly. The summer was full of work and quiet growth. Hannah's garden thrived, her fishing skills improved. She saw Takoda more frequently now, sometimes staying for a few hours, sometimes sharing a meal she had cooked. They talked more, slowly, cautiously, sharing small pieces of their lives, their histories, their thoughts. He told her about the traditions of his people, the stories woven into the land, the deep connection they felt to the earth and sky. She told him about her life before, the small farm in Ohio, her dreams with Thomas, the crushing weight of their loss. They sat by the fire one evening, the stars a brilliant swath across the ink-black sky. The air was warm, fragrant with pine and earth. "My people, they do not trust," Takoda said, his gaze fixed on the flames. "They have seen what the settlers bring, sickness, broken promises, taking land." "I know," Hannah said softly. She had seen it too. The fear and greed in the settlement, the casual dismissal of anyone different. "You are different," he said, turning his head to look at her. You listen to the land. You are quiet, like the forest, strong, like the rock." Hannah's heart fluttered. His words were simple, but they held more weight than any elaborate praise. He saw her, not just a white woman, a settler, but Hannah, a person finding her way. "You saved my life, Takoda," she said, stating the simple truth that lay at the heart of their connection, when no one else would have. He looked away, back at the fire. "The spirits guided me," he murmured, almost to himself. "They did not want you to walk to the ancestors yet. Your path is here." His belief in the spiritual world was profound and unwavering. It was another difference between them, yet it didn't feel like a barrier. It felt like a different language, one she was slowly learning to understand, filled with respect for the unseen forces that shape the world. Their relationship remained unspoken, undefined by the labels her old world would have demanded. There was no courtship, no declarations. There was just shared silence, shared work, shared meals, a deep, growing respect, and an undeniable warmth that flowed between them, chasing away the lingering chill of loneliness. It was a bond forged in necessity and refined by mutual understanding, something quiet and strong, like the roots of an ancient tree. One late summer day, the quiet peace was shattered. Dust rose on the horizon, carried by the wind. Riders, many of them. They weren't from the settlement. These moved with a different kind of purpose, a more predatory air. Bandits, perhaps, or men looking for trouble. They were heading straight for Hannah's cabin. Takoda was there, helping her mend a section of fence. He saw them too, his body tensing, his eyes narrowing. "Trouble," he said, the single word sharp. Hannah felt a return of the old fear, the vulnerability that had consumed her after her family died. But it was different this time. It was not a helpless fear. It was a fear coupled with a fierce protectiveness for the small corner of the world she had built, and for the man standing beside her. "They will see you," Hannah said, a knot forming in her stomach. She knew the danger he was in, being seen here with a white woman, on land the settlers were claiming. "They will see us," Takoda corrected, his voice calm, resolute. He did not consider leaving her. The implication was clear. They faced this together. There was no time to run. They had to face it. Takoda moved quickly, efficiently. He instructed Hannah to get inside, to bar the door. He took up his bow, arrows nocked, his stance wide and steady. He was not just a man, he was a warrior, defending his ground. The riders arrived, pulling up their horses sharply before the cabin. There were 5 of them, rough-looking men, armed with rifles. Their leader, a burly man with a scarred face, grinned unpleasantly when he saw Takoda standing alone before the small cabin. "Well now," the leader sneered, his gaze flicking from Takoda to the cabin. "Look what we got here, a squaw man hiding out with." "Well, looky there, a white woman." His grin widened, full of malice and cruel amusement. "Looks like you found yourself something cozy, redskin. But this ain't your land. This is our land now. And that woman, she belongs with her own kind." Prejudice and greed, side by side. Hannah's blood ran cold, but she stood firm behind the barred door, listening. They saw Takoda only through the lens of their hatred, reducing him to a label, ignoring the man, the helper, the protector he was. They saw her as property, something to be claimed or taken. Takoda said nothing, his face a mask of stone. He held his bow steady, an arrow aimed directly at the leader. His silence seemed to infuriate them. "Gonna be stupid, huh?" the scarred man taunted. "All right, boys, let's show him what happens when he thinks he can stand against us, and then we'll see about the woman." One of the riders dismounted, rifle raised. Takoda's arrow flew, impossibly fast. It struck the man in the shoulder with a sickening thud. He cried out, dropping his rifle. Chaos erupted. The remaining riders reacted, fanning out. Rifles barked. Takoda moved with astonishing speed and agility, a blur of motion. He was 1 man against 4, but he used the terrain, the cabin, the very air around them as his allies. Hannah, peering through a crack in the wall, watched in terrified awe. He was magnificent, dangerous, a force of nature himself. An arrow found its mark, another man falling from his horse. Takoda dodged rifle fire, the bullet splintering the wood of the cabin, whistling past his head. He was drawing them away from the door, away from her. His focus was absolute, his movements economical and deadly. He disappeared around the corner of the cabin, drawing the remaining riders after him. Hannah heard shouts. the thunder of hooves, more rifle shots. She gripped the knife, trembling, unsure what she could do. She was one woman, her strength still not what it had been, but she would not hide, not entirely. This was her home, her life. The man who had saved her life was out there fighting for them both. She heard a cry, sharp and pained. Her heart leaped into her throat. Takoda. Pushing aside her fear, Hannah unbarred the door and slipped out. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and dust. She crept around the side of the cabin, her eyes scanning the small clearing. 2 riders were down, their horses skittering nervously away. The scarred leader and 1 other man were still mounted, but their attention was focused on Takoda, who was partially concealed behind a large rock formation, his bow seemingly useless at this range. He had taken a hit. Blood bloomed darkly on his thigh, just above the knee. He was pressing a hand against it, his face tight with pain, but his eyes were still sharp, calculating. The 2 remaining men were trying to flush him out, circling warily. Seeing her emerge, the scarred man grinned again. Well, well, looky what came out to play. He started to turn his horse towards her. It was a diversion, unintended by her, but Takoda seized the moment. While their attention was split, he moved, drawing a knife, low and fast towards the remaining mounted man. Hannah knew she had to do something. She looked around frantically. There was a pile of dry branches Takoda had gathered for firewood, just a few feet away. An idea, reckless and desperate, flashed into her mind. She snatched up a smoldering log from the edge of the fight, where a stray shot had ignited some dry brush. She didn't hesitate. With a cry, she threw the burning log directly at the scarred leader's horse. The horse, startled by the sudden fire and Hannah's unexpected appearance, reared back with a shriek, throwing its rider. The scarred man hit the ground hard. It was enough. Takoda, despite his wound, was on the second man, his knife a blur. The fight was brutal, quick. The man fell. Takoda turned, favoring his injured leg, towards the scarred leader, who was scrambling to his feet, reaching for a fallen rifle. But Hannah was closer. Driven by a surge of adrenaline and a cold, hard fury, she ran towards the fallen man, the small knife in her hand. She wouldn't kill him, not like he would have killed Takoda, killed her, taken everything again, but she could stop him. She kicked the rifle away just as his fingers brushed against it. He snarled, turning his malice-filled eyes on her. You stupid woman. Before he could do anything else, Takoda was there, a silent, imposing figure, despite his bleeding leg. He stood over the scarred man, his knife poised. The leader looked up at the impassive face, the dark eyes that promised swift, final justice. Fear, real fear, flashed in his eyes. Get out, Takoda said, his voice low and dangerous, devoid of any hint of the gentleness Hannah had come to know. Take your dead, and gone. The scarred man scrambled backwards, away from the knife, away from the quiet intensity of the warrior. He glanced at his 2 fallen companions, then back at Takoda and the resolute woman standing beside him. He saw the look in their eyes, the unwavering resolve forged in hardship. He saw that they were willing to fight, not for greed, but for their lives, for their home, for each other. And he saw, perhaps, that he was beaten. He got unsteadily to his feet, clutching his arm where Hannah had kicked him. He cast one last hateful look at them, then turned and limped towards one of the remaining horses. He mounted awkwardly and rode away without a backward glance, leaving his dead behind. Silence descended, broken only by the nervous whinnying of the riderless horses and the distant cry of a hawk. The adrenaline drained away, leaving Hannah weak and shaking. She looked at Takoda, who was leaning heavily against the rock, pressing harder against his wound. Takoda. She ran to him, kneeling by his side. The wound was deep, bleeding freely. You're hurt. It is nothing, he said, though his breath hitched slightly. Nothing? Hannah scoffed gently, her voice trembling. You fought like the wind itself. She tore strips from her skirt, awkwardly trying to make a bandage. He watched her, his expression softening as she worked, her brow furrowed with concentration and concern. You? He said, his voice rougher now. Through fire, like a spirit protector. Hannah gave a weak laugh, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't think, I couldn't let them hurt you. Not after. She trailed off, the weight of everything they had been through together pressing in on her. He reached out a hand, hesitant, and gently touched her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear. His eyes, usually so guarded, were open now, full of a warmth and depth that took her breath away. "We mend this," he said, looking down at his leg, then back at her. The "we" hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. It wasn't just his leg they would mend. It was their lives, together. They managed to get him back to the cabin. Hannah cleaned and bandaged the wound as best she could, using knowledge gleaned from years on the farm. He was stoic, only grunting slightly at the pain. Lying in her small bed, his large frame filling the space, he seemed vulnerable for the first time since she had met him. She sat by his side, tending the fire, watching him sleep fitfully. The crisis had passed, but it had changed things, clarified them. There was no going back to the quiet, undefined companionship. They had faced death together, fought for each other. The bond was no longer just about survival and gratitude, it was something deeper, something earned in the crucible of shared danger. He was slow to heal. The wound festered for a few days, Takoda growing feverish and weak. Hannah nursed him, applying poultices he instructed her to make from local plants, bathing his brow, coaxing him to drink. She slept little, her worry a constant companion. During those days and nights, the last walls between them crumbled. The man who had saved her life was now in her care, trusting her completely. The vulnerability was shared, creating an intimacy deeper than words. When the fever broke, and he began to recover, the cabin felt different. Quieter, yes, but also fuller. His presence was no longer that of a temporary visitor, but of someone who belonged. He watched her with a new openness in his eyes, a quiet affection that mirrored the feelings stirring in her own heart. One morning, sitting by the fire, the air cool but the sun promising warmth, he spoke. "My people, they will not understand," he said, his gaze steady. "They see only difference, as the men who came saw." Hannah nodded, understanding the difficult truth. His world, her world, they were colliding, and there were forces in both that would resist their connection. Prejudice was a stubborn vine, wrapping around hearts and minds. "And the people in the settlement," she replied, "they would not understand either. They fear what they don't know, and they hate what they fear." "Then," Takoda said, reaching out and taking her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers, "we make our own place, here, where the spirits guided me, where the bird flies." He wasn't asking for her hand in marriage in the way her old world defined it. He was offering a partnership, a shared future built on the foundation they had already laid: resilience, mutual respect, shared hardship, and the quiet, unexpected love that had blossomed in the icy wasteland. He was asking her to choose this life, with him, outside the boundaries of their old worlds, defiant of the judgments that would surely come. Hannah looked at his face, etched with the lines of a hard life, but softened now by hope and affection. She thought of the loneliness, the grief, the sheer despair that had almost claimed her. She thought of the quiet strength that had appeared at her door, the hand that had offered warmth and food and life. She thought of fighting side by side, of his belief in her strength, of the peace she felt in his silent company. This man, this quiet warrior from a different world, had not only saved her life, he had given her a reason to live again. He had shown her that kindness existed even in the harshest places, that connection could bloom in isolation, that resilience was not just about enduring, but about finding strength in vulnerability and shared purpose. He had helped her see beyond the grief, towards a future she hadn't dared to imagine. "Yes, Takoda," she said, her voice clear and firm. "Here, we make our place here." He did not smile, but the warmth in his eyes deepened, a silent promise. They sat together, hand in hand, watching the fire, the cabin silent around them. Outside, the spring wind whispered through the trees, no longer a blade, but a gentle sigh. The land, their witness, held its breath, ready to welcome them both home. Life was not easy. There were still challenges. The land demanded hard work, the isolation could be profound, and they knew the outside world, with its judgments and demands, was never truly far away. But they faced it together. Takoda taught her the ways of his people that resonated with her spirit, the respect for nature, the wisdom of the ancestors, the understanding of interconnectedness. Hannah shared the practical skills of farming and keeping a home, weaving their two worlds together into something new and strong. They built a life piece by piece, season by season, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unexpected places where love and belonging can be found. The cabin, once a tomb of loss, became a home, filled with the quiet rhythm of their shared existence, the warmth of their fire, and the deep, unspoken language of two souls who had found each other in the wilderness and chosen to build something beautiful from the ruins. They were two outsiders who had found a home in each other, defiant of the cold, the grief, and the prejudice of the world outside. Their story was quiet, private, etched into the very fabric of the land they called their own. It was a story of survival, yes, but more than that, it was a story of connection, of healing, and the enduring power of unexpected kindness in the face of overwhelming loss. It was a love story, written not in grand gestures or flowery words, but in shared silence, mutual respect, and the quiet strength of a hand held firmly in the face of the storm.